Rebecca Wildbear, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we're talking about your book, Wild Yoga, and I have to admit, first of all, I have to admit I'm only halfway through because this turns out to be one of those books that I can't cram the night before and just get all the details. I had to go slow, and there's a lot of narrative and richness, but up to page 130, 140, I'm good. And I realized that I did not really know what yoga was until I started reading this book. And so I would love for you to begin by just like talking about yoga and like maybe you can probably anticipate the gap between what I think yoga is and the way you present it.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I almost didn't call the book Wild Yoga because I was afraid that if people saw yoga in the title, they would assume that it just meant yoga. And the definition of yoga by our mainstream culture is an asana practice only. And that's true that asana practice is like one branch on the tree of yoga, and it's an important branch, but the whole tree is sometimes goes missing. And that's kind of what my book is including, is trying to bring yoga back to the whole tree of what yoga is, what it has always been, which is a personal journey of understanding yourself deeply, who you really are, and also practices that help us connect to the world on a deeper level, that expand and stretch our consciousness. So I bring yoga back to that larger process and questioning, a set of practices that do that. And asana is included in the process, but it's not the primary part. It's more like a branch of the tree.
And by asana,
but I wanted to call the book yoga because I wanted to reclaim the word, to mean what it really means.
And by an asana, you just mean like a pose or right? What people do at yoga studios.
Exactly. Like that's what I would say, that people in mainstream culture, they transpose the word yoga for yoga asana. Like I would say yoga asana to mean the poses and practices of yoga, and like if I'm going to a yoga asana class, I'm going to a class where we go through a series of asana poses physically. But yoga, the word by itself without asana, has a larger meaning.
All right, so let's talk about the other word in the title. So you could say that, okay, yoga is more than just poses, it's contemplation, it's introspection, but you could do it from sort of a Western psychological perspective. You're not doing that either. You're saying that yoga is overtly meant to connect us to something wild. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I in calling my yoga wild yoga, I'm also in some ways bringing it back to its roots too. I mean, I think of the original yogis in caves, trying to reclaim their animal nature by coming up with poses. A lot of the pose names are named after animals, to kind of this idea of like somehow we need to get back into that nature, and that by doing so, that can help us connect to the larger world. But I definitely take it beyond that, in that that was a long time ago. The world was very different at that point, and here we are in Western culture at this day and time. So how do we, in this particular moment in time, reconnect ourselves to our wild nature and to the wild world around us? So I take us through a series of practices to do that. Starting with the body, just coming home to our body. How do we reconnect, given that we live in a culture that is stuck in the head more and encourages the mind over the body? And how do we do that in a culture that doesn't acknowledge the natural world as even alive or sentient? How do we start to see the world as alive and sentient, a being to whom we can be in relationship to, and actually be in relationship, actually have conversations with? And and onward, how do we open our hearts when we close them related to trauma? So the book is really all sorts of practices that go on from there to open us to having this relationship with the wild world, this relationship with our own wild bodies, and then a relationship with all these other aspects of the world, which in many ways we're taught don't exist, or that we can't have a relationship to, like our dreams, the muse, the deep imagination.
Hmm. So, when I think of like, yoga or like wellness, I think of moving into feeling better. And there's a lot in your book that kind of feels like it goes in the opposite direction. You're inviting grief, inviting vulnerability, inviting a form of, I think you call it feral female anger, right? Like
Ferocity.
ferocity, right? Like we're not, you're not inviting us to a happy place necessarily.
Right. Well, yoga is often associated with, can be associated just with, feeling peaceful. And I am inviting relaxation. And that is what yoga does. We relax and, drop into our bodies. But also when we drop into our bodies, we can feel the truth of what's here, what's really inside of us related to having been alive and being presently alive in the world. And I'm encouraging us to really be in our feelings. A lot of times there can be a lot of shame and guilt about what we feel. Like if we feel angry, oh, I'm not really supposed to feel that. Or if I feel sad, oh gosh, there must be something wrong. I got to fix that. I should feel better. And I'm actually kind of inviting people to feel what they really feel, what's really here related to our lives and the world we live in, and how that actually can be the most valuable thing we can do. And that is part of being in relationship with the world.
Hmm. Can you tell maybe a story from your life about when you kind of first realized, I guess as an adult, because when you talk about as a child, like all this stuff came naturally, or this, understanding that the world was alive and that trees were your friends, but kind of like coming back to that knowing. Because for me, and I've read, every single one of Bill Plotkin's books and been following him for years, so I'm tenderized a little bit. But still, for me, I feel like I'm still in my head, and a lot of this is very sort of theoretical, and I'm trying to understand it clinically. Can you talk about an experience that kind of pried you away from this culture enough to reclaim that relationship with the wildness in yourself and in the world?
Sure. I mean, there's all sorts of different stages of it, I would say. Like you said, as a child, I was connected to trees and nature, but I was also pretty scholastic. And, when I went to school, when I went to college, I was editor of the college newspaper and I was an A student. I was quite into my studies and things going on there. One of the first things that drew me away, I'd always liked nature. I'd always liked being in nature, but that didn't mean that I took the time for it. So a couple of things happened in my later college years. One was I worked at a summer camp in the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland. I lived in Maryland, grew up in Maryland. My college was in Maryland. The Catoctin Mountains are near where Camp David is, and I worked at a summer camp for people with disabilities there, and it was one of the wildest places I've ever lived. I went to sleep at night, looking at the stars and hearing the sound of the trees blowing in the wind. And I realized how much happier I was living in a wild place. And it felt alive. And I think that can be the first step for people, is noticing, wow, like how I feel in a wild place and with nature around. Like I actually, like if I really drop into my body and notice what it's like to be here. And I think a lot of people, as we noticed even during COVID-19, people have preferences for being in nature. Everyone flocked to wild places. So, that's a start. Like that's a noticing, wow, my body feels better here. I want to go to this place. That's the beginning of a relationship. Even if we're unconscious to it, something's happening. When I was also in college, I also got cancer, and that was another wake up call in a big way to me around what really mattered or what was important. Because suddenly I thought I might die, even though I was young. That had never crossed my mind that could happen. Like most people, I thought I was pretty invincible. I hadn't been ill very much, and but the odds were higher that I would die than that I wouldn't. And so suddenly, I was taken to a place of, you know, um, what really matters in my life in the world, and starting to feel something inside myself that was precious and sacred. I'd always felt nature as a kind of God, like a nature mystic, a place where God lived. And then, when I started working with Animas Valley Institute when I was 29, the first time I I mean, I skipped over, I was an Outward Bound instructor. I was a wilderness therapist. So because I preferred being in nature, I found ways in my life to be there. Like that's where I had my job. So I would have to be there, and I was happy there. I cared about that more than making money. So then I still was missing something because I felt like even though I was in nature with people, and even though I had connected to a sacred place in me and I felt nature as sacred, I felt still like there was a deeper conversation that needed to happen, that could happen, that I was still somehow missing something, that in some way I still viewed nature like this backdrop, this place, not like I wasn't connecting to it at the deepest, level I could. So I started looking into eco psychology, and I even started studying with Animas Valley Institute and actually going out on the land and learning methods to talk and listen to nature. And it took time, but I mean, actually, in that first 5-day intensive, I had an experience. The one I write about in chapter 2, with going out into the natural world and having the conversation with the squirrel, that was one of the first conversations that I had that just impacted me, that magic can happen out there. And then I think I write about it in chapter 3, some of my quest that happened 6 months later, and the hike I did in the canyon that happened after that, the magical experience I mentioned in chapter 3, where I was seeking to open to my heart, and the mysterious response I had from nature, where some flowers that I was with, and praying with the night before and placed on a flower, like they suddenly were moved in the night to another really more beautiful location in the middle of the water that I had been praying to the night before and crying to the night before. So, there was many magical experiences like that. That was one of the first. But there's, ways when I experience the natural world talking back to me, like things happening that were surprising, that I realized that it was an alive being. It wasn't just a backdrop. Like I was actually, it wasn't an idea somebody was telling me. I was actually having an experience of that, multiple experiences of that were undeniable.
See, so I've read many of those sort of anecdotes in Bill Plotkin's books and in your book, and I'm like looking back on my life, thinking how many of those experiences have I had and not noticed, or blown off, or told myself, well, you're making that up, right? Or like thinking like I'll finish a book and I'll be really inspired and I'll go out in the backwoods and hug a tree and like, is anybody watching me because I feel silly as shit right now? Like, what do you see people needing? Because to me, there's such a chasm between the work that you do and the understanding you have, and the incredible resource that's available to us in terms of healing, and our willingness to step into it, acknowledge it, and be open to it. And I feel that I'm speaking for myself as much as anybody else.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a main piece. One of our traumas in life as humans, there's many, is I'd say not appropriate mirroring. When we're children by adults. In other words, we go outside, have amazing experiences. We come back and we want to tell adults about it, but they're busy and they got other things to do, and they're in a hurry usually, and they didn't maybe track their own great stories. So somehow kids grow up and we grow up learning to discount our own stories. I can't tell you how many times when I've been guiding in the wilderness, especially with people for their first time, who go out into nature on the wander invitation that I offer, who come back and say, oh, well, nothing happened for me. And I say, oh, well, can you tell me about that nothing? And as I listen to it, almost always something happened. And it happens at a more subtle level sometimes than in our culture, which is, used to like iPhones and movies and just, I would call gross experiences or being entertained. What can happen in nature can sometimes be more subtle to our senses, and it takes time for our senses to open up and experience that. So a lot of times it's in the beginning, it's just helping people begin to open their senses to what is happening and begin to honor their own stories of what is happening. And then when they honor their own stories, the next step is, once they realize something happened, then they can begin to go back and know that how to continue the conversation. Oh, something happened. I might want to go back and say thank you, or ask another question, or offer something and see what
Mm.
happens next. Stay in the conversation.
Mm. Yeah, it's weird that I'm more, my brain is more willing to assign sentience to Chat GPT than to the garden, in the meadow in my backyard. Like,
Hmm.
like it's hard for me to think of them as sentient. I'll read science. It's like, well, they're sharing resources and they're producing chemicals and pheromones in response to predation and all this stuff. And it's easier for me to believe a computer is sentient because it's speaking my language than the wild world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well, the computer was built to meet our Western mind where it is in Western culture, and so I can completely relate. It's so addictive. Sometimes it's hard for people to even put it down or step away, and there's all sorts of cultural expectations sometimes around staying connected. When I go out to the wild, sometimes it takes like 2 or 3 days sometimes, and I notice when I'm off my phone or my computer and I'm out in nature, so my eyes and my being are actually connecting with these other beings instead of that my consciousness starts to shift, and it takes some time. In that I start noticing the details on things. I start noticing, the wind blowing and when it blows and the way it blows and the quality of the water running, and insects or animals and their movements, and I start changing as I think of us sometimes as digesting images or experiences, and as my being is digesting that relationship and those experiences, I start changing. I'm different than when I'm on the computer, digesting the all those experiences. So I agree
Mm.
with you, and I think I think in my deepen your ecological connection, step one was go outside for a walk without your iPhone. And that can be hard because we're used to we're listening to great music, or great podcasts, or checking our email or our iMessages while we're out there. Go outside without it and begin to start to see what your connection is. Let your attention be really available to those others. But it can be hard. It's a little, the transition between the two is is a steep curve, is a steep cliff. One is very different from the other.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll go out with this express purpose of just being in nature without my iPhone, and the first thing that occurs to me is, "Ooh, I wish I had my plant identifier app with me."
Yep, I agree. And sometimes it can be hard. I think this is another thing I mentioned relative to that first or second step is, even if we go out without our technology, our mind starts thinking like, oh, okay, well, now I'm on this walk, so let me just get organized with what I'm going to have to do when I get back and figure everything out, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to do the rest of my day, the rest of my week, the rest of my life, just figure everything out, just think about stuff. And then we're still not present to the world around us because we're just, planning the future. We're in our mind, or we're reviewing the past. So how do we really be present with the world around us? And that's kind of what the steps are to try to take us into that, just into that
Mm.
relationship. It starts really with noticing the other. It's kind of like when you're with your partner, right? And you're on your iPhone, or you're on your computer, or you're thinking about stuff. You're not really present with this other human sitting next to you, and that might be okay sometimes because maybe you're both, working or taking care of other things. But in moments where you're really trying to be present with each other in your relationship, in your connection, it doesn't really work when you have those other things around,
Mm.
pulling your attention away. And it's the same with the wild world. If we're really to be attentive to the wild world, it means bringing our presence centered attention, and also being willing to do this as a practice, meaning we'll probably fail, just like meditation practice. We sit there and try not to think about stuff, but we do. So we do the best we can. And I notice that's sometimes why longer stays in the wilderness can work better over time, because it can take time to disconnect, to detach ourselves. and to really drop in. So we can do the best we can in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and sometimes longer immersions allow for a deeper time of really leaning into that relationship.
Yeah. So I think there's a selection bias for people who are going to be interested in this, and it's people who like love nature, right? And loving nature these days comes with huge helpings of grief, either felt or repressed, and guilt for being part of this culture. Like, doesn't that either contaminate or make it extremely complicated to go out to nature to give us things to, like, heal me, make me feel better, when like I'm part of this culture that's destroying you?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Such a great point. It's you know it's hard to, how do we be in relationship with the wild world? It's sometimes it can be like, depending where we are. I mean, there are still some truly wild places which exist where we can go and feel nature and be immersed. And then there's so much loss and devastation, and more each day. More lands and species die, and things don't seem to be slowing down on that front. People are taking actions to make things better, but the actions that destroy are still continuing in large part. And there are people trying to stop it, but it's not an easy thing to do. So I agree. It can come with lots of grief feelings. For me, it's not really a choice to just say, oh well, I guess nature's gone now, so I'll just move on. It's, first of all, it's not gone. There's still lots of forests and wild places left. Still lots of wild animals left. It's still here, and it is being harmed. So part of that relationship is letting myself feel that. It's like, how can we get away from that? Even when we're in love with human partners, I mean, they get sick and they get illnesses, and eventually they will die. Um, I think love and grief go together, whether it's with the human world or the natural world. Like, part of
Mm.
being in love with anything and opening our heart to anything means that we're also opening our heart to the hard times that can come up with that other. And right now, the natural world, it has both beauty to still give and offer. I sometimes am very, really shocked is the right word, by how much nature still gives me and how much nature still gives all the people that I take out. I'm kind of like, how do you still keep giving, given what humans are doing? But it's just, nature is itself, and that's what it does. That's who it is. And it still keeps giving to people and still keeps giving to me. That's its nature. And so it doesn't seem to be stopping, despite what it doesn't seem to stop. For me, it hasn't stopped loving me despite what humans are doing. But its love
Mm.
for me has opened my heart so that I can't help but be angry or sad about ecological devastation. That I can't help but see what I can do to help, even if the situation might seem impossible on some fronts. That it's not about necessarily looking at the long-term view, because we don't know the future one way or the other. We could make predictions one way or the other, but it's about reestablishing like a healthy relationship with this being that I love and care about so deeply. That's like an other, but it's also like God to me. Would I protect God? Would I stand up for what I love? And so part of that is doing what I can to help shift
Mm.
people's consciousness, bring people into relationship with nature, and connect that to also prioritizing the wild world. Is like, excuse me, of all the political issues there are, isn't the most important one Earth?
Mm.
Given that she's our mother and we get everything from her, our very life, our very oxygen, our very water that we drink, the land, everything. Isn't that relationship the most important of all? So that's part of bringing us back too. But people are in different stages in the journey, and sometimes we just need to wake up and be loved and be held and know who we are, and that's part of what it takes. That's
Mm.
where we are. But ultimately, as you know, in my book, the final chapter leads to become a love warrior for Earth, to bring our love back to helping the world.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that, especially when I saw before I got the book even, that one of the endorsements was from Derek Jensen, who is, for folks who don't know, like, certainly an eco warrior, and you might say a little rough edged. He's not writing about, sort of love and spiritual development so much as, like, he's written, like, the only reason he doesn't blow up dams is he's afraid of getting caught. Like, he wants a war, and he can see the enemy. And it's not moose and elk and elephants and salmon. It's other human beings. I'm wondering how you navigate, with like a sort of rage and anger and grief on the one hand, and an invitation through this book and through your work and through your life to the people who are doing it to say, you can choose a different path.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Derek is definitely one of my friends, and kind of I look up to his capacity to what I would say stand up for the natural world, and kind of unrelentlessly, you know, um, and that's I think sometimes what it takes to when we look at the environmental movement, a lot of things are called green and part of the environmental movement, but they're really about saving humans and saving civilization. And one of the things I like about Derek's work is he's unrelenting about what's best, what's best for the earth, what's best for the animals, what's best for the natural world. Um, Even in Bill Plotkin's work, who I've studied with for a long time, he'll say that an elder is somebody who can hold the human consciousness and the earthly consciousness in themselves at the same time when they make decisions. They can hold what's best for the well-being of both. And I think that the mainstream culture, when it talks about politics or green movements, most of the time it's just thinking about what's best for the humans. I love Derek's voice, and he's inspired me because he's actually one person that I think switches that around and thinks about what's best for the earth.
Hmm.
And so by his being able to speak like that, it actually helps all of us come back into balance if we're willing to actually go there, and actually take that perspective in. And when it comes to even what's best for the future of all beings, human and non-human, what's best for the earth is really, I think, where it's at. Because if the earth is destroyed or gone, 100 years into the future, it's the humans aren't going to be here either. So, I think that, like I said, people are in different places in the journey, and the three sections of my book go through different places. Wild, the 6 chapters in Wild are a lot about coming back to our own wild nature, being able to listen to the earth, being able to listen to our dreams, our bodies, our hearts, our emotions, rewilding ourselves. We were raised in this civilized dominant culture, so there's a lot of things in us that are just made to live in that, and sometimes we can feel the ache of what's missing. But how do we open up to what's missing? That's what rewilding ourselves. The second section, which is holy longing, is about opening to the spirit and the soul journey. Most of us know, especially sometimes when we wanted to disconnect to the dominant culture, that there's these other realms that are transpersonal. Like Bill's journey is all about soul and our unique gifts that we bring, and how do we connect to the purpose we're here to live in our mythopoetic image. And spirit is a lot about our connection to everything. The totality. What John Muir said, that anytime you pick up one thing in the world, it's hitched to everything else. Like, and the cosmos, like beyond this earth, like the larger view. So, that's what the second section takes us into, a journey of how we go on a journey of soul and spirit. And then the third section, Beloved World, takes us into how do we serve the world, which I think is a natural proponent of, if we become healed and healthy enough. I never consider any of us totally healed and healthy in this culture. I mean, sometimes you can wait forever and think, I'm not quite healed enough. I still think this, I still feel this. Well, the parts of us are never going to be, quote, perfect. But we get to a tipping point, I feel like, where we're healed and healthy enough, and we know enough about our purpose and our connection to everything, that we just want to give. We want to give back to the world. So, and that's also with an understanding of, like a sober understanding of where the world is, where the earth is, and where we are in this moment in time. And so, how do I come back and offer myself? And that's where, there's a number of chapters in chapter 6 about that. And a lot of my book is about connecting our visionary selves that dream and imagine, and that dream with the earth and listen to the earth and imagine with the earth, to the challenge of ecological devastation and where we are in these times. How do we bring that visionary self? How do we not just necessarily go into old narratives of, oh, I have to do this or I have to do that, but also not turn our face away from the reality of, what's going on and the kinds of things that are needed. Like, it's sort of like holding both and going and envisioning for what is mine to do. What is the way for me to offer myself in these times? And part of that to me is becoming a love warrior for the earth, because, well, it's a real missing piece in our culture. Like, activists are kind of usually volunteering, and they're also usually that word can even be people that are, put down for like, why are you bothering to do this, or you're too angry, or that's such an extreme perspective, or things like that. But I'm wanting to connect the personal journey in wild yoga to the journey to care for our planet, to come back. And I'm not proposing exactly what that's going to look like for anybody. I'm actually proposing a relationship between the earth and our visionary selves and our dreams that can invite us to ask for help and get help, and to act on the visions that we receive.
Yeah, I guess it's like, going into a marriage, or, a dyadic relationship where, like, you wouldn't say, this is how you do it, right? But you are saying, listen and speak and, uncover your truth, and it'll kind of muddle itself, will muddle through together, as opposed to like, this is the formula for a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, relationship is about listening. I also say sometimes to activists, well, I don't know, like, how do you want, I wouldn't want somebody to save me if they didn't want to talk to me. Talk to me, like, have a relationship. Like, what do I want? Let's have a conversation. So I'm inviting people into a relationship in wild yoga where they have a conversation with the earth and dreams. I've always disliked politics very much, so it's rather ironic that I even included it in my book, and that I've even gone there in my life, because if I'd had my druthers, I wanted nothing to do with it.
Mm.
I was a philosophy religious studies major in college. Like, I was about the sacred, and the earth was my sacred connection, and all this work was to take me closer to like the greater powers of life and the sacred inside me. But when you go out on a vision quest and you listen, you don't know what the earth's going to ask of you. That's the scary thing. So what was asked of me is to be invited into the kinds of realms that I'm most terrified of and uncomfortable with, and that this is where I'm needed, and this is the direction to go. So I think that's just it. We can't know ahead of time what we might get asked, but when we do, we it's having the courage to go and ask, and to let go of the comfortable life we might have established that might be just good for me egoically, and be open to where we might be carried, and where it takes us, and what it might ask us of us, and how it will grow us in the meantime.
So I want to segue off of that last bit about being a warrior, loving warrior for the earth, into the last bit of every chapter is a yoga pose. And so this one, there's warrior pose. And I love the way you kind of describe these poses that I've done so many times, on the mat, in a class, with a video, from memory, where I'm focused on, okay, turning the hip this way and, lifting from the chest, but never the spiritual or relational meaning behind it. And so, like, maybe we could begin this conversation by talking about warrior pose and first of all, what it is, and then what we can get out of it other than, great glutes, buns of steel.
Great. Yeah. I think I mentioned the warrior pose in that feral female ferocity chapter, but we could also bring it into the love warrior for the earth too. As part, I think it's part of it. Love warrior is a later chapter in the book, so we've already taken into account the feral female ferocity. But warrior pose is a pose that, kind of brings us out into the world. Some poses kind of like they take us deep into the cave, deep into ourselves, deep into the dream time. Like, well, if you look at child pose, for example, that's the pose I used in Dream with the Cave Womb. That's a pose that kind of like takes us more deeply inward into the cave of ourselves, or the cave of, the psychic cave of our imagination. But warrior pose is kind of about standing up, engaging, and meeting the world. It's like standing firm, standing strong, and there's a real solidity to our legs and the stance that we have. It's like we're ready to engage with life and the challenges that are ahead. Our arms are up, our chest is out and open. There's different stances with our arms and the ways that we move and the ways that our hips move. There's different variations of warrior that might work differently for different situations. Warrior one, we're standing front and center. We're ready to engage with what's right in front of us. Warrior two, we're still facing front, but our body's out to the side. So we might be ready to engage a larger span of, what's around us. Then we have peaceful warrior, right? Where we're kind of standing back. Maybe we're not ready. We're still standing firm in our legs, but we're not ready to take, maybe any direct action or engagement. We're peaceful. We're just, witnessing what's going on. We're watching. There's all sorts of stances that we might take in warrior. And I think that energy, we're calling into ourselves. We're calling into ourselves a kind of a capacity to stand firm and engage with the world and try different movements with our arms. And, oh, I wonder what this will do if I stand in this way. Oh, I wonder what this will do. I'll try this out. How does this feel in me? And how does this meet the world? How do I receive the world when I'm in this position? So, there's stories that we can feel into through our bodies in the different poses, which is what I do in sharing that one and other poses.
So the pose yeah, go ahead.
I love warrior pose. I think in particular, I speak a little bit against patriarchy in my book, and also I've listened to many podcasts myself on patriarchy, and often warrior is considered, like part of the patriarchy and bad, like going to war at all. And there are a lot of aspects of warring and fighting and anger and violence that are very unhealthy, no doubt about it. Men being forced to wars that aren't for good causes, aren't what they believe in. And people, obviously all sorts of violent acts that aren't good. But there's also a kind of warrior that is, I think, a healthy warrior that's that will stand up and protect what it loves. It's a natural instinct. It's not at all bad. In fact, it's missing. Sometimes we talk about toxic masculinity in our culture, but there's also, like I'd say, the toxic feminine quality. And these are archetypal qualities which exist in all people, regardless of gender or sex. But the archetypal feminine has a quality of being submissive, like just, going along or being pleasing. And that's missing this warrior energy that has the capacity to stand firm in their understanding of what they love and what they want to protect. And it may not always be about speaking or being physical or being acting in particular ways, but it starts with that standing firm in your body and being ready to engage. That's a warrior pose.
And I love that that you included that section about the men's prison, and so that when you talk about patriarchy, you're separating it from the people who are infected by it. That the men who have done some of the worst things in our society are perpetrators, and they're also the victims of this colonizing thought pattern and pattern of being. There was a line, I'm not going to get it exactly, but it was basically like, patriarchy attacks what's vulnerable. And I was thinking about that in terms of men that I know who have become hard because whatever, the most beautiful parts of themselves were vulnerable, were poetic or shy or quiet or appreciative of beauty. And, those were the parts that we were made fun of for, called gay for, shamed for, and learned to hide at all costs, especially from themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, when men are missing the feminine quality in them, so when male-bodied people are missing the feminine quality in themselves, it's hard to connect. I mean, there's a big loss there. There's a big difference, for me, in meeting a man who has the feminine quality in him, and where it's missing. It's this feminine quality that I'm calling back in the practices of wild yoga, and I'm calling us to honor, is it's missing in women, it's missing in men, it's missing archetypally, it's missing in the world. And that's what I'm wanting to honor and call back in. What patriarchy exists when there's when that's denigrated, when that archetypal quality is denigrated. Men can't embody it, women can't even embody it anymore, because women are supposed to be more like men if they're going to like achieve or rise in the system. And and these feminine qualities that are very listening, that have to do with listening, and have to do with honoring the earth, are gone, or they're belittled as nothing. And so I'm kind of calling all those aspects of the feminine back in, and I'm also calling aspects of what I would call archetypal masculine energy, which about protecting that, in a healthy relationship, which we all have, inner masculine and feminine. There's part of us that can protect and cherish what's most valuable, and that includes these feminine energies of ourselves, and the world and others. And it's largely missing in our society, and so most people grow up, men and women, missing it in different ways.
Yeah, and you're saying in the book that the body has to participate in the conversation, that we can't just do this on the couch, right? And we can't just do it in psychotherapy.
Yeah, I've been a psychotherapist, and I've been in psychotherapy, and I mean, it's great to have great conversations, and it can very much help to have somebody listen to you and share your stories. But there's a place it stops, it ends. There's places it can't take you, and those places are places where your physical body has to have the conversation, has to have the courage to go out and have the conversation itself.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking is you have a couple of stories about therapists or guides, mentors to you, who were careless or ego-driven and caused some harm. And like, of course, humans are going to do that, right? And you even say, like, there was a section about, I think, in Divine Love, that like the purpose of the infatuation is to kind of teach us from I can't remember what indigenous group, but that we learn to love the person with the small problems and the small words, that they're a manifestation of the divine. And like one of the big things in psychotherapy is like attachment, and the safe attachment with a therapist can heal people, but we're all going to screw it up. And I think there's something I kept reading into this was like attachment with nature is really the ultimate safety.
Nature is always there for me. I mean, I think I wrote in Receive the Love of Trees a lot about that. I went out there, I think I shared a story where I went out there after being triggered by something my mom said, and how the natural world, and that was after having a relationship with trees for 3 years. And so they were who I was leaning on to help me love myself. And trees are just always available to listen. I mean, there's been maybe, conversations can surprise you, and there's been a few exceptions to that with trees, but most of the time, I've talked to trees. They've invited me into their forest of love and giving, which is just what they do. You can tell I just love trees in my book. It's just a theme throughout the book to honor the intelligence of forests and trees. Could have called the whole book Forests or Trees. But they're there. And those primary relationships, I would say, even now, help me so much. And that's what, I totally agree with you. Humans are all wounded and limited, and they love us and help us in moments, and we can have great friendships with humans too, but there's drama and disappointment and all sorts of things too. And trees are always there, and always, most of the time, always available to connect and to love. And, for me, when I sit with a tree, I tap into not only feeling loved, but also I begin to be at the edge of tapping into the greater intelligence and consciousness that they have. I mean, I won't say that I certainly don't fully take it on. I'm not a tree, I'm not fully a tree or a forest, but just being in the presence of their wisdom is being in the presence to me of one of the greatest teachers humans could ever have in the whole world.
Yeah, I loved what you said in the description of tree pose as to while you're doing it, like imagine that you're around longer than many human lifetimes. And you also talk about being able to understand yourself and your mother and have some grace and forgiveness when you looked over the span of multiple generations, when you saw, your great grandmother's wounding your grandmother because of patriarchy, because the one place a woman can have some control is over her own daughter. And it's almost like you took a tree perspective to be able to see that big picture and find some peace and solace in there.
Yeah, the conversation, which always takes us to surprising places. I shared a conversation, yeah, where the trees, they see you in such a deep time perspective. They see over decades and generations, and of course, humans, we tend to see, well, this is what happened today or this week, and so yeah, the tree invited me into a much larger perspective of the patterns going on, which then made the momentary interaction seem like, oh wow, this is not about anything. There's not something big happening here or surprising. This is just an overarching pattern that's here and part of things. And then it can enable me to see too, it's not even about, I know my mother loves me, even though there was that interaction that was triggering, but it taps you into the deeper love and the capacity to see the pattern. So I wasn't stuck in this place it's all about this one interaction.
So the pose that surprised me the most was in the chapter on romance. And you start with this lovely story about this, your first crush and writing his name backwards in your diary, and it just sort of evoked that full flush of adolescent infatuation and first love. And the pose, and then you broaden it into like the importance of romance and what these longings can tell us about ourselves and the world, and you end with chair pose. And I was like, where did chair pose come from? Like I've got to say, that's like my least favorite pose of all. And for people who don't know it, you're sort of standing up, your hands are like doing something in front of you, and you're bending, like your butt's going back and your knees are bent. And it's just like, just gotta fucking endure this thing until the instructor says we can move out of it. And hopefully the next pose will be corpse pose. Like, what was going on, or where chair pose became an embodiment or a vehicle for romance and that kind of love?
Well, chair pose is literally like sitting in a seat, right? Sitting in the seat, it's not there, it's not an actual seat, but our body's kind of in a pose like we're sitting in seat. And the chapter, which is about following the mystery of what we love, I would say following the mystery of what we love is what guides us to our soul, is what invites us to sit in the seat of ourselves. And it isn't easy, you're right. It's not like an easy pose. It's so dangerous and difficult to have the courage to really know our hearts and to really know what we love and to actually put ourselves out on an edge. I always think of human culture like we like to keep all the possibilities open, have all the, not make a choice, but we could have this life and this life and that life and this, and then I'm not sure I want to choose just yet. But when we are vulnerable and following what we love, we kind of make a leap. We kind of act to make a choice in some way. And also, I'm connecting it a lot also to when we fall in love. This is, such a big topic. I don't know if I can cover it fully in this time, but I'll just touching into it. How, when we fall in love with something outer, how is it actually about who we really are? How can we reclaim those projections, as a psychological word used, but how can we take that back in? If I'm in love with something outer, part of me is saying, that is who I'm supposed to be. Like I want to be with the other because I'm like, I want that to be what my life is about. That's why if I get with that other, maybe my life will be about that. But really, it's about this other is inside of me. So how do I embody those qualities and carry them into my life going forward and become what I love? And that's certainly not at all easy. I mean, the easy part would be, oh, I just want to get with someone else and let them do that, and then let them love on me, and then that's in my life. The much harder move, that's a lot like chair pose, is, no, I'm going to be that. I'm going to have the fire, which is, chair pose has a lot of fire. I'm going to have the fire in me to be that, and to sit in the seat of myself, to hold that seat. And then I go into chair flow, because chair flow itself, it has a lot of movements. It makes chair pose a little easier, by the way, because when you hold chair pose, that's pretty intense. When you do chair flow, you're actually only in chair pose for a moment in the flow, in a whole flow, in like a series. But the flow calls in the grace and the movement of breath and body, like a vinyasa flow that allows us to court. And I say, making ourselves beautiful, we also call the other to us, which is our inner beloved. Sometimes this is a hard concept for people to get, because sometimes it can take a while for the inner beloved to show up to us. Like, what? The what? The who? It can be a lot easier to live in a projective mindset. It's like, it's out there, it's in this other human. But, we can call our inner beloved to us by courting. And I get into that in a later chapter more, but it's somewhat in this chapter too, with the chair flow, is that we're inviting a flow to court the mystery of what we love. Like, for example, sometimes we don't even know what we love. I mean, what do I really love? Like, it can be hard to, what is it for sure? Because I'm not talking about, a nice car or something material. I'm talking about on a deeper level, like what really matters to us, like why we're here. What do we really love about this life? What would we give our life for? Who would we give our life for? That kind of love. And sometimes we don't know right off the bat, what do we love? So we court it. We can court it through chair flow, which is, trying to make ourselves as beautiful in our presence and our breath as to call the beloved to us, to call a sense of what we love to our consciousness, to our understanding.
I'm
Like
thinking about. I'm thinking about the quote that you share from Martin Prechtel about hunting. Right.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll read it if that's all right. So sometimes it doesn't help to know what it is you are really hunting, or what love is supposed to look like, because the beauty that the hunter becomes and creates through his willingness to fail in pursuit of what he deeply longs for but doesn't yet understand can cause the incomprehensible thing to show its divine face. So there's a lot in there about vulnerability, about risk. It's almost like, you have to be willing to risk it all for the kind of love that will really fill you.
Yeah. And I love that quote. It has so many levels to it, doesn't it? The willingness to fail. That's like, what? People are like, what? I mean, most of the consciousness in the world, a lot is, well, I think I should use my time wisely and go after what I can attain. That's not courting, because courting, you're willing to fail, and you're willing to make yourself vulnerable to what really matters. You don't know if you'll ever, quote, get it. In fact, you probably won't get it in whatever way your mind is thinking about, but in some other way, in moving toward it, you become it. You court what you love until you can become that.
So I want to close by asking you to invite listeners to do something to begin before, and I'll tell them, like, go get the book Wild Yoga by Rebecca Wildbear. But while they're waiting for it to arrive, what's a practice or a thing that people can do who have hung on your every word and are resonating and want to begin this journey?
Well, I'll start with the first two chapters. One is about listening to the intelligence of the body, and two is about deepening your ecological perception. It's like the body and nature. Those are places to begin. Some of my practices in the first chapter are kind of like, lie down and feel your body. How does it want to move? What does it want to do? I always say the first step might be losing your mind. I always tell people to lose your mind. That's and just come down into your body. Like, how does it want to move? Does it want to like lie still for a while? This can even be a practice you can do on a morning where you don't feel like you have to get up right away. Like, let yourself lie around if that's what you want to do. Sometimes that is what people want to do to start with because our culture is so fast paced. Or lie on your mat and like just notice. If you know yoga, you might do some moves, or if you don't know yoga, that's okay. Just lie there and like feel, how does my body want to be still or move? Like actually starting to track what's really happening in your body. If you do a yoga practice or you watch one or you participate in one, do that. And then after that practice is done, you're into your body because you just did the practice. Or maybe you do some kind of other thing with your body. You run or you swim, so you've pulled yourself into your body through an activity. Then just lie there and say, what does my body really want now? What is it? How does it want to move? Or take your body out to nature and, sit with your back against a tree or one of your own favorite places, and just ask yourself, what do I love about this place? Why do I like to keep coming back here? Can I look around and see who's here? What are the beings that I'm most attracted to? Those would be great starting places to just connecting to your body and nature.
I guess what you're saying is that no matter how civilized we've become, our bodies are still wild. Our bodies are still nature. Like we don't have to go to Borneo or hike in Alaska to encounter nature. It's like you are nature, right?
Exactly. I mean, I live in Mancos, and I saw Mancos, Colorado, and it's a lot of farmland. There's still wild places I can drive to, but part of me wishes the forest was still out here rather than the farmland, and I still see the trees. But a mile and a half away, I can go to the Mancos State Park and walk along the river and in the trees and connect with some. It's just a very small spot. It's like a mile loop, but it's a place, and I can go further, drive further, and go out to other places. But yeah, wherever we are, nature is here. And wherever we are, nature once lived beneath the ground where we are, even in cities. We can imagine the city that was here before we were here, before it became a city. That was wild. And we too are wild bodies. And I started this book out slowly with these 2 chapters because I wanted everybody to feel like they could join this process, that nobody is beyond is too far gone. I mean, we've all been indoctrinated with Western, mainstream culture, but there's a pathway back. And these practices to me are a pathway back to wildness of our body, wildness of connection to nature, and opening to these relationships, which we've been taught to disconnect with, which can really give us guidance personally and planetary, right now for who to be, who we are, and how to live. But step by step, starting with the basics.
All right, beautiful. Well, Rebecca Wildbear, thank you so much for writing this book. It really is a love letter to each of us and to the world. And thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful talking with you and hearing about what your questions are and perspectives on the book. I really appreciate it. Thanks for reading and thanks for sharing me on your show.
You bet. And how can people follow you, stay in touch? I know you've written a few of the Animus Valley newsletters. How can people follow your work besides getting the book?
Well, I have a website, Rebecca Wildbear. It's just my name, all lowercase, no spaces, RebeccaWildbear.com. And so you can go on there and you'll catch, what I'm up to. You'll see programs online and programs in person that I do with Wild Yoga. I also do programs with Animus, and I'm on their website too. Also, you can email me. I have an email address on my website, so you can kind of contact me. I also am on social media. Facebook is the one I'm most active with, but I'm on the other ones too. So you're welcome to engage with me that way too.
All right. Well, thanks. Maybe one day I'll find my way to one of your programs and meet a tree.
That would be wonderful. Maybe in the adventurous time in your life.
Yeah, you do any stuff outside of the U.S.?
I'm in Latvia in late June, doing prayers in the dark and a dream work intensive.
Ooh, cool. All right. Well, I'll check it out. I think everything in Europe is just a hop, skip, and a jump. So
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Everything's pretty close.
awesome.
Well,
Well,
it'd be great
Rebecca,
to see you out in the wilderness.
I definitely need it. And so thank you for being a guide.